Before we begin, I'd just like to mention that while I will try to cover most of the important rules of the game, this will not be a fully comprehensive tutorial, but is rather meant to introduce the most important aspects for you to be able to start the game as soon as possible. I'd also like to add a warning that Crusader Kings 3 deals with topics that could be considered outdated or even offensive due to its simulation of historical societies and politics, but they in no way represent my opinion on any matter and are only included in this video for the purposes of explaining the game's mechanisms. I'd also like to mention that different cultures and languages I may not be familiar with are represented in the game, so there's a huge chance of me mispronouncing some things, and for this I apologize. The following tutorial only includes the base game of Crusader Kings 3. Crusader Kings 3 is a role-playing grand strategy game set in the Middle Ages. You play as a dynasty establishing your reign by acquiring lands and titles through diplomacy, intrigue, and war. You will also manage your court members, family members, and heirs to make sure that the right people inherit what you've accumulated and stay in power when you die. The game was developed by Paradox Development Studio and published by Paradox Interactive. Crusader Kings 3 is a role-playing game, so there aren't really any winning conditions. You'll set your own goals and play the game to craft a story for your dynasty. That could be becoming the world's most ruthless line of tyrants, creating a utopia, creating a rags to riches story for your family, and so on. So for the purposes of this tutorial, we'll say that our general goal is to become one of the most powerful dynasties in the world. The game is played in real time, meaning events will continuously and simultaneously occur as you go through time. There's an option to pause the game here in the bottom right side of the screen if you want to do some actions or think on some decisions. And you can also change the speed of the game to go faster or slower in the same corner. You start either in the year 867 or 1066. The choice will depend if you want a shorter or longer game, and the game ends in the year 1453. You start the game as a character you either chose or created, and you play through centuries with your control moving to designated heirs once your current character dies. And a huge portion of the game is making sure that your heir is ready and has the right skills and traits once your control transfers to them. The game immediately ends if your character dies and they have no heir. Another huge part of the game is managing your people. This can be either people in your court or family members. As a ruler, you need to fill jobs with the right people, make sure they also have the right skills and traits, and that they are content with you so they won't quit or scheme against you. You have to make sure as well that they have proper replacements ready in case they do quit or die. Before we continue, I'd like to point out that Crusader Kings 3 is a dense game. There are a lot of functions and terms you'll encounter throughout the game. If you find yourself questioning something, you can always hover your cursor over keywords to see what they mean. I'd also like to mention that the game comes with a lot of variety in terms of cultures, faiths, laws, and so on that you can play as. These may impose different rules and restrictions in different aspects of the game. So it's possible that what I'll be explaining may work differently or may have different or additional requirements depending on the character you're playing. Before we get into the actions you can do and decisions you make in the game, first I'd like to briefly explain some concepts that will be very important and relevant throughout. Like any game with an economic aspect, Crusader Kings 3 will have you collect resources that will be used for different actions. Here, in the upper right side of the screen, you'll find the 4 major resources. All of these resources have a lot of uses, so I won't be able to explain them all, but we should be able to tackle a few of them as we go through the tutorial. The numbers represent how much you have of each at the moment, and the smaller number underneath represents your monthly income for each. And by hovering the cursor over these resources, you'll be able to see where the income and any deductions are coming from. Gold, as you can probably imagine, is used to pay for a variety of things such as the hiring of people, their salaries, briberies, buildings, and so on. Prestige is used for actions that thematically require some influence to initiate, such as declaring wars, performing government and diplomacy-related actions, and so on. Along with its income, when hovering the cursor over our prestige, we'll also find our current level of fame. Each level of fame provides different bonuses and additional actions, and you can progress your level by simply acquiring more and more prestige. Piety is used for actions relating to faith. We'll explain this further when we get to the faith aspects of the game. And renown is similar to prestige, but it's for your entire dynasty and carries over to the next characters you control. Similar to prestige and your level of fame, renown progresses to your dynasty's level of splendor. Each level will also provide additional bonuses which you can check by hovering your cursor over your current level of splendor. Another thing that will almost always be relevant during the game are the people's opinion of you. Below each character portrait, you'll find a number that can either be positive or negative. This represents how much the specific character likes you. Red negative numbers generally indicate animosity towards you, and green positive numbers indicate a certain degree of liking. A character's opinion of you is important as it can greatly influence how likely you can persuade, manipulate, or bribe them to do something for you, or how well they will do the job assigned to them. Their opinion of you can also dictate how loyal they will be. Characters who don't particularly like you can scheme against you or help out schemes made against you by other characters. They can even create a faction that can try to overthrow you as a ruler. There are ways to influence a character's opinion of you. The easiest ways are through character interactions. By right-clicking on a character's portrait, you'll be presented with options of how you'd like to interact with a specific character. Options that are grayed out means these options aren't available at the moment, most likely due to not meeting the required prerequisites to be able to do them. To give an example, swaying a character will attempt to increase a character's opinion of you. This can succeed or fail depending on some factors. Giving characters gifts and giving them jobs can also help increase their opinion of you. Another thing that can help with managing your people's opinion of you are traits. Choosing the right people with the right traits to put in certain positions can make the game easier for you. By clicking on a character and opening their character panel, you'll find a character's traits here. You can hover your cursor over each one to see what they provide. Some traits will provide information on their compatibility with other traits. For instance, in this scenario, our character is gluttonous. And as we can see, they will automatically have an increased opinion of other gluttonous characters and automatically have a decreased opinion on temperate characters. A huge part of the game is acquiring and keeping lands and titles to be able to expand your control and power throughout the map. By default, the map is divided into realms with corresponding rulers, and by zooming in a bit, we'll be able to see the prominent titles on the map. Each banner represents the highest ranked ruler in the realm, and the icon above the banner represents their title, which in turn will tell us how powerful this ruler is. Titles have a hierarchy in terms of the amount of land it has under its belt. We'll get into a few important terminologies here that you'll encounter a lot in the game, so just bear with me as we go through them. Holdings are the settlements visible on the map. There are different types of holdings, but we'll explain them in a later chapter. A barony is the lowest land title available. They are mostly irrelevant in terms of titles as baronies cannot be split or become independent, and you cannot play the game as a baron. They are always grouped together to form one of the other higher titles, and they may or may not have a holding in them. To better explain lands and titles, let's take a look at this scenario where we're currently playing as the Emperor of Abbasid. When zoomed out, as mentioned earlier, you'll see the highest title in each realm, which we currently have here as an Emperor. Abbasid is an empire, the highest title in the game, and is represented by the purple crown on top of the banner. As you can tell, the Empire of Abbasid is composed of smaller lands with smaller titles. This is because each character can only have a limited number of holdings that they can personally own or manage regardless of titles. These are called your domains. You can find your domain limit here on the upper right side of the screen. In this case, we can only have a maximum of 6 domains. Characters can have multiple titles which will give them control over more holdings, but once you exceed your domain limit, your character will receive penalties and income and your people's opinion of you will start to decrease as well. You can hover your cursor over the domain limit to see any ongoing penalties if there are any. To help you manage territories you've acquired without going over your domain limit, you can create titles and assign vassals. We'll explain creating titles later, but vassals are a way of delegating titles and holdings to other characters while still remaining in control of them. The second highest title is a kingdom represented by a red crown above the banners. In this scenario, we have the Kingdom of the Armenian Principalities, which is within a realm delegated to Prince Ashot. While they are in charge of managing this kingdom, as we can see here, we are currently their liege, which means that apart from indicating proper ownership of the land, we also get a cut of this kingdom's income. A kingdom can be composed of several lower-tiered titles as well, and the next lower-tiered titles are Duchy and County, represented by a silver and brown crown icon on the top of banners respectively. They work similarly to kingdoms to a smaller extent, and you can personally own a maximum of 2 Duchy titles. Take note that the name of the titles given to rulers can vary depending on your culture. We will explain culture in a later chapter, but the titles, regardless of what they're called, are functionally the same. For example, our title here, which I will not even attempt to pronounce, is just this culture's version of an emperor. Once you start a game, you will be thrown in the middle of a character's story, and there are several important things you need to check before you unpause the game. The first thing you'll do at the start is to choose a lifestyle for your character. You can do this by clicking on this button on the lower left side of the screen. Here, you'll be presented with 5 options. Almost all actions you do with a character will be related to one of these lifestyles, and each lifestyle corresponds to one of your character skills, which can be found on your character panel here. Choosing one of these lifestyles and continuing to do related actions will help you unlock perks, which are bonuses or additional functions relating to the lifestyle they are in. You choose Diplomacy if you want to play as a character who's good at starting and keeping relationships with other rulers and your own people. Martial is what you choose if you plan on warring a lot and taking what you want by force. Stewardship provides perks that helps you build up your wealth much faster. Choose Intrigue if you prefer rooting out secrets and manipulating others, and Learning is if you prefer a knowledge or religious-based realm. Once you've chosen your preferred lifestyle, you'll be given the option to once again choose from 3 specializations within the lifestyle that will provide bonuses. I won't go over these anymore or the perks available in each lifestyle as there's quite a lot, but you can always hover your cursor over each one to see what bonuses they provide. Take note that you can change your lifestyle choice after a certain number of years if you happen to change your mind, or if you've already unlocked all the perks from a specific lifestyle that you want. I'd like to mention as well that when your character dies, these perks won't carry over to your next character. Some characters may start with a lot of renown. One of the uses of renown is to unlock legacies for your dynasty. You can find legacies by clicking on your house icon here on the bottom left of the screen, and by clicking Open Legacies. Legacies are like perks. They provide ongoing bonuses to your character with the difference that legacies carry over to your next characters. I won't be going over the legacy options, but again, you can hover your cursor over each one to see what they provide. As mentioned earlier, the game immediately ends if you die without an heir, so it's very important to have one before anything else. There is a hierarchy in terms of which member of your family will be your heir. It's usually one of your children, or one of your siblings if you don't have any children. The assigned heir also depends on the type of succession laws your realm has in place. We'll explain succession laws in a later chapter, but ideally, you'd want your heir to be one of your children, whom you've trained and educated in aspects you want them to excel in. This way, you'll have some control over what type of character you'll be controlling after you die. By clicking on your character portrait here on the lower left side of the screen, you will be presented with a lot of information about your character. But don't worry, as we'll go through most of these one by one as they become relevant. In this panel, you'll find your spouse and heir if you have any. For example here, I chose a character who doesn't have a spouse or children yet, so we can go through the decision of choosing a spouse together. When choosing a spouse, there are several things you need to consider. Usually, the choice would be which person would best serve the story you want for your dynasty. But as mentioned earlier, for this tutorial, we're simply trying to be the most powerful. You can click on the silhouette to see all possible options. The first thing we'll consider are congenital traits. We would want our next of kin to be stacked with the best traits possible, and choosing a spouse with positive congenital traits will increase the chances of this happening. You can find a character's congenital traits here if they have any. Green represents positive congenital traits, while red represents negative. You can hover your cursor over each one to see what they provide. Another thing to consider are alliances. Marrying people for alliances is a common occurrence in the game. We will explain alliances further in a later chapter, but having an alliance with another ruler means they won't be able to attack you or take your lands as easily, and you can call each other for help during a war. Other things to consider are a character's age and traits. We are of course trying to find someone we'll procreate with to create the perfect heir. We are currently playing a male character, so a woman's fertility is something we need to keep in mind. A woman's fertility decreases as they get older and they become barren around the age of 45, while male characters will only start to lose their fertility around the age of 70. Some traits can also affect a character's fertility. For example, a character with the chaste trait has decreased fertility as you can see here. You can also consider a character's skills when choosing your spouse. Once you have a spouse, you can have them assist you in certain events and actions that will have them adding their skill points to yours when relevant. It's also ideal to have a spouse with a high learning skill when it comes to raising children, as that can contribute to having a child with better skills and traits, which we will explain further in a later chapter. If you have a specific type of character already in mind, there are ways to narrow down your search here. You can either sort the list to your preferred category, or you can click the search button here to filter out the list. For instance, if we're looking for a character with a comely congenital trait and has a maximum age of 25, we can type that in here, and all characters that fit will appear. Take note that some cultures and faiths will allow multiple spouses and even concubines, which will increase your chances of having more children, to have your pick of the litter in terms of an heir, and to allow you to make more alliances by marrying off your children. Before unpausing the game, you also need to familiarize yourself with the titles you currently have and holdings you own. This is so you can decide which of these are more important to you and needs protecting, and which titles and holdings you can afford to lose in case your neighbors decide to attack you. It's also important to check if you have any holdings that are delegated to vassals, and to check these vassal skills, traits, lineage, and opinion of you to make sure they will serve you right. Although at the start of the game the choices on ways to replace vassals are limited, it's still important to take note of vassals you prefer and vassals you don't, so you can create a plan on how to either make them a better ally or take the position away from them. The difference between personally owning a holding and delegating them to a vassal is the amount of income and levies you gain from these holdings. Levies are soldiers used during battles. We'll explain them further in a later chapter. Holdings you own will gain you the full amount of gold and levies, while holdings ruled by vassals are only obligated to give you a percentage of their gold and levies. To check this, you can open the Realm panel by clicking on this button on the right side of the screen, and here, you'll find a summary of your domains. And by clicking on the Vassals tab here, you'll find a summary of your current vassals. In this panel, you'll see the amount of gold and levies that you are currently receiving from your vassals, which in this case, we're only getting a small percentage. Like everything else in the game, there are a lot of ways to increase this, such as lifestyle perks, traits, or even assigning better vassals. One of the ways to manage your vassals is to check and modify your current contract with them. If the option is available, you can do this by choosing a vassal from this panel and clicking on the Modify Vassal Contract button. Here, you'll find different agreements you have with your vassal, and different options as well of things you can change as long as you already meet their prerequisites. I won't be going over these anymore, but as usual, you can hover your cursor over each option to see what bonuses, consequences, and prerequisites that each have. There are a couple of ways to delegate a title or holding to a vassal. One way is you can right-click on a character you'd like to assign as a vassal and look for the option Grant Titles. This will open a panel that will present you with options of titles you can grant the character. And another way is to click on a holding, and on the lower left side of the window, you'll see the option to grant the holding to a character. As you can probably imagine, having fewer vassals is usually preferable, so you'll have less people to manage and watch over. If you find yourself with too many holdings, you can create titles to group several holdings together and to delegate to a vassal. If any titles are available to create, they'll be found here in your notifications. And by clicking one of these, we'll be able to see which lands will make up the new title. And once we create the title, we will be the default holder of it, but we will be given the option to grant it to another character. Another way to grant titles is to simply open your character panel by clicking on your character portrait on the lower left side of the screen, where we'll find all the titles we currently hold. You can click any one of these to see which part of the map composes the title, and to find the option to grant it to someone else. Take note that when granting titles, you need to be careful because if a character ends up the same rank as the highest title you currently have, they will become independent and split off from your realm. For example, here, we are currently the Duke of Wessex and the Duke of Kent. If we were to grant one of these titles to another character, as you can see here, we will receive this warning. And just to demonstrate, after still continuing this action, Kent has become its own realm, and by clicking on the ruler, we'll see that we are no longer this character's liege. Another thing to check and manage are your vassal's heirs. As mentioned earlier, keeping a vassal loyal is important, but like your character, they will eventually die. So it's good to have some influence over their heir, who are likely to take over as your vassal for the title or holding. Remember that you can arrange a marriage for your characters, including your vassals, to make sure they eventually get a good heir. And it will be good to nurture a relationship with them early on so they stay as loyal as their parents. There are even ways to mentor and educate children to have even more influence over the type of person they'll grow up to be, but we'll explain that in a later chapter. One of the ways you can increase your control over your vassals is by increasing your realm's crown authority. By opening the realm panel, you'll find your current crown authority here. Each level of crown authority opens up new options of managing your vassals. You can hover your cursor over each one to see what they unlock, but I'd like to note that these might differ depending on your culture, government, or faith. There are several types of holdings. Castles have the best defenses and provide the most levies. Cities provide the most income. Temples provide bonuses relating to your faith. And tribes provide the greatest number of levies at lower levels. You can check the available holdings in a county by clicking on its capital. For example, by clicking Ipswich, one of our domains, we can see here that this county already has 3 holdings constructed and we have room for 1 more holding. At the bottom of the same panel, we'll see available slots for buildings and constructed buildings as well in each holding if there are any. You can hover your cursor over each one to see what they provide. In this case, the holding in Ipswich has 4 slots for buildings, and none have been constructed at the moment. To construct a building, you can simply click on an empty slot which will provide available options and their cost, effects, and time it takes to construct. Aside from constructing buildings and holdings, you can also upgrade existing ones. You can do this by simply clicking on the holding type here, or the buildings already constructed, and you'll be presented with upgrade options, their cost, effects, and the time it takes to complete the upgrade. Take note that constructing holdings and buildings can have different restrictions and functions depending on your culture, fate, government, and so on. Another thing we need to check within our holdings is our current control. By clicking on one of our domains, we can see here what our current control for this holding is. Basically, the higher the number, the more we get out of this holding in terms of taxes and levies. And you can hover your cursor to see where the number and any deductions are coming from if there are any. Your control of a holding generally increases on its own over time, but there are ways to speed it up such as perks and council actions, which we will explain in the next chapter. Aside from viewing the division of realms on the map, you can also see the de jure lands of each title. I'm still not quite sure how to properly use de jure grammatically, so I apologize if I use it wrong. But de jure lands represent territories that are by law supposed to be included in certain titles, but may not currently be due to characters taking lands from each other. You can check the de jure lands of certain titles here in the bottom right side of the screen. You can click this button to see the de jure division of duchies, this button for kingdoms, and this button for empires. To give a proper example, as we can see here, Ptolemyd is currently its own realm. However, by dividing the map by empire titles, we can see that it's supposedly part of the Abbasid Empire. The relevance of this at the moment is that while your vassals may have you as their liege, if the holdings they rule over are de jure part of a different duchy, kingdom, or empire, there may be some restrictions in what you can ask from your vassal. For example, in this scenario, while the kingdom of the Armenian principalities is currently part of our realm, they are de jure part of the Byzantine Empire. This means that if we were to go to war with the Byzantine Empire, we won't be able to ask for help from our vassal in the kingdom of Armenian principalities. There are several ways to change the de jure borders of titles. One is simply owning the holding for about 100 years. In the same example, if we were able to keep the kingdom of Armenian principalities for a long period, it will eventually de jure become a part of our Abbasid Empire. The next thing we need to manage before we unpause the game are our council members. You can check your council by clicking this button here. Your council consists of 5 councilors, each with their own jobs they specialize in. Each council position utilizes a specific skill, which you can see on the upper right side of each position. Basically, the higher the indicated skill is, the better results you'll get from related actions and events. Your court chaplain is in charge of religious relations. They provide a connection between you and your faith, providing bonuses if they personally like you. They also help in fabricating claims on counties when trying to acquire lands, but we'll explain that in a later chapter. This position is different with the others in that it slightly changes depending on your faith. For instance, if you're Catholic, your court chaplain are called bishops, and you don't get a choice on who sits in this position. Court chaplains utilize the learning skill. Chancellors are mostly in charge of keeping a good relationship with your vassals. They help boost your vassals' opinion of you to make sure they stay loyal, and they utilize the character's diplomacy skill. Stewards are in charge of handling your realm's economy. They utilize the stewardship skill, and as you can probably imagine, having a steward with a high stewardship skill will lead to higher amounts of income and faster infrastructure development in your realm. Your marshal is in charge of training and commanding your knights, levies, and men-at-arms, which are used during wars and battles. They utilize a character's martial skill. Your spy master is in charge of carrying out and disrupting schemes. Schemes are a huge part of the game and are very useful when trying to manipulate other characters and the game state as well to your bidding. You can initiate schemes against other characters, and other characters can scheme against you as well. And having a good spy master who has a good opinion of you and a high intrigue skill is crucial to the success of your schemes and the failure of schemes against you. Each of these positions will have their own actions represented by the circles on the bottom left side of each portrait. The highlighted actions represent what they are currently doing for your realm, and you can hover over each one to see what they do. Some of these actions will be grayed out, meaning you cannot have your counselors perform these at the moment. By hovering our cursor over them, we'll see why that is the case at the moment, usually indicating requirements or prerequisites for the actions that we currently do not meet yet. At the start of the game, these council positions will either be vacant or have people assigned to them already, and in most cases, you'd want to replace them with someone with better skills for the job. For instance, in our current scenario, we have a chancellor with a relatively low diplomacy skill. I'd like to mention here that it's common for vassals to ask for a council position, and of course, not giving them what they want can decrease their opinion of you and may lead to some consequences. So this is another thing to consider when choosing vassals. You'd usually want a vassal that excels in a skill so they can be useful as a counselor as well. To replace our chancellor, we can click this button here, which will present us with options of people who can take the position. And as explained earlier, we can sort the list by diplomacy skill by clicking here, so we are able to see which characters have a higher diplomacy skill and are more suited for the job. Characters you'll find in this list are mostly people who are currently part of your court. Your court represents the important characters living in your realm that can be managed and assigned jobs. You can find your current courtiers by clicking this icon on the right side of the screen and clicking on the courtier tab. Aside from your courtiers, you'll also find guests. These are characters that are just visiting your realm, but if you think they might be useful to you in some way, you can invite them to become a member of your court. You can do this by clicking this button here, or by right-clicking on a character and choosing the Recruit to Court option. And as you can see, recruiting a guest will cost gold and increase a character's opinion of you. Another part of the game is expanding your court so you'll have more options for counselors and can even raise children to be suitable replacements with better skills and traits when your current counselors age and die. To do this, you can invite people to your court through various means, one of which is to arrange a marriage for your courtiers. By right-clicking on a courtier, there will be an option to arrange a marriage for them or find them a spouse. If you choose to find them a spouse, you'll be given options of characters outside of your realm to marry to your courtier. If accepted, this will automatically bring the characters to your court. However, I want to note that if the courtier that you're trying to find a spouse for is female, you'll have to click the matrilineal option for the spouse to go to your court and not the other way around. A matrilineal marriage will give precedence to the woman in a marriage. Depending on your laws, government, culture, faith, and so on, marriages usually default to a patrilineal marriage. This means that the woman in the marriage will follow wherever the man goes, and any children born in the marriage will take the name of the father. Basically, this dictates who has more power in the relationship. Another thing you'll find in the courtiers panel are court positions. Like counselors, these are important jobs that eventually need to be assigned a suitable character. Once again, you can hover your cursor over each one to see what they will provide to your realm. I'd like to note that some of these positions aren't immediately needed, so you can assign one later during the game when they become relevant to save gold, as characters assigned in these jobs will require a salary. The most important among these positions is the court physician. Characters in the game, including you, can get sick or wounded from battles, simply aging, or schemes made against characters, decreasing their effectiveness in performing different tasks. Having a good court physician is crucial to not only speed up the recovery of your characters, but also to prevent characters from dying. While characters assigned to this role will get better over time, it's still better to assign someone who is already experienced in the job. Before choosing a character for the job, you can check each character's aptitude. In this case, all of our options have a terrible aptitude for this job, so none of these are good options. In cases like this, at least for the court physician position, there are ways to look for better candidates. Aside from marrying your courtiers to characters with more relevant skills as explained earlier, you can open the decisions panel here. These are extra actions you can do during the game, and you can hover over each one to see what they do. More and more options will become available here as the game goes on, but for now, we'll focus on this one. This decision will allow you to search the world for characters that could be more suitable to be your court physician. But take note that the traits and skills of the characters that will be presented by this decision will be random. If you're looking for a good physician, you can look for characters with the physician trait that comes in 3 levels represented by stars on the trait. There's Novice, Average, and Renowned. A good tool to utilize during the game are the notifications on the top of the screen. Here, you'll always be notified of available crucial actions, decisions, and information. For example, at the moment, we are being told that our bishop, which is our court chaplain, isn't endorsing us, so we're not receiving bonuses from our faith, and need to boost their opinion of us somehow to remedy this. It's also saying we can declare war on one of our neighbors, our brother is currently unmarried but eligible, we currently don't have a court physician, and that we don't have the maximum number of knights possible. Aside from this, we also have these other crucial notifications that are telling us that we haven't chosen a lifestyle, our heir, which is currently our half-brother, isn't married, and that we as well aren't married yet. Aside from notifications, another thing that will frequently pop up as the game goes on are events. These can range from things related to your realm that you can't control, to things that will give you options on how to proceed. Some of these events will require skill checks. In this case, you will be given options on how you'd like to react to the presented scenario, utilizing one of your skills to assess the chances of you succeeding or failing. For example, here, after playing for several in-game months, we receive this notification that is informing us of an event that's presenting 3 possible options to choose from on how to resolve it. By hovering our cursor over these options, we will be informed of the possible outcomes, the effect of those outcomes, and the chances of each outcome from happening. The chances for each outcome depend on different factors, usually your character's skills. Sometimes the event mentions the relevant skills, sometimes it doesn't. The easiest way to acquire lands and titles is through wars. Of course, only if we have bigger and better armies than our opponents. So before initiating or taking part in wars, we first need to check and manage our military. The easiest way to assess the strength of your military is the information indicated here in the upper right side of the screen. This is the total number of soldiers we have and the overall quality of our army. An army's quality is determined by the knights and the different types of units included in the army. For us to check and manage these things, we can open the military panel by clicking on this icon on the right side of the screen. First, we'll explain levies. Levies are your basic soldiers. They don't have any special characteristics, so the most important aspect when it comes to levies is their number, and you can increase the number of your levies as explained earlier by controlling more holdings. Next up are our knights. Knights are crucial in armies as they can provide a huge boost in an army's overall strength. Here, we'll find the maximum number of knights we can have at the moment, and the actual number of knights that we do have. By clicking on this, we'll be able to see which of our courtiers are assigned as knights, and other characters that can be assigned as well. The important aspect of a character when assigning knights is their prowess, and you can view each character's prowess here. The higher the number, the better. Most of the characters you'll find here are courtiers, although there can also be guests you can choose to recruit in this window. When assigning knights, it's important to identify which characters you can afford to lose and characters you need to keep alive, as knights can die in battle. In this screen, you'll be able to see which characters are assigned other jobs and are part of your family to help in this regard. For example, Oswald here is our current heir and our chancellor, so we wouldn't want to send this character to battle. And in order to prevent this, we can click here and forbid this character from being a knight. And like any other positions that can be assigned to courtiers, it's usually a good idea to try to recruit people through the processes explained earlier, such as arranging marriages, to acquire people with better skills for the job. You can also find here in decisions an option to invite potential knights with the invite knights option. But as we can see, this action will cost some prestige. As mentioned earlier, levies are soldiers without any specializations, so they are the weakest types you can have. However, you can train them to be better soldiers here. By clicking this, you'll be presented with options of the different types of regiments you can train your soldiers to become. Each type will come with their own bonuses, weaknesses, and costs. You can click on each regiment to see a detailed description of what they offer, such as their stats, type, counters, and bonuses depending on terrain. The downside of training levies is that regiments have higher salaries regardless of whether they are in battle or not. Once chosen, you can choose to increase the amount of levies that will be trained as these regiments for a cost. If you find yourself in a war with a weak army, you can instead choose to hire mercenaries. These are freelance armies that you'll be able to control for a number of years for a cost. Some fates can also have their own armies you can hire, which can be accessed here in the Holy Orders tab. Once you are satisfied with the composition of your army and are ready to have them fight or move around the map, you'll need to raise them. On the map, one of your domains will have a red banner indicating where armies will gather once you choose to raise them. In our current scenario, for instance, our rally point is at Norwich, and you can change and add rally points through the military panel here on the bottom side. By clicking on a rally point, you can choose to rally only the local army, meaning the levies in a single holding by clicking this button here. Or you can choose to raise all armies, which will make use of all levies from all your domains. Take note that you cannot declare a war if you have any armies raised. When raising armies, it's also important to make sure you have extra gold and renown collected, as having armies raised will have an ongoing cost. For example, as we can see here, we currently have an income of 2.3 gold and 1.9 prestige. But after raising our armies, we can see that these incomes have now decreased with gold becoming negative. And another important aspect to consider when armies are raised are their supplies. This determines how long your armies can fight, move, and or stay raised. When your army's supply depletes, they will suffer an attrition penalty where the army will start to slowly lose soldiers. If you wish to keep an army with low supplies raised, you can bring them to a friendly territory to be resupplied. Once raised, you can have your armies move around to do a variety of things. When moving armies, you can simply click on the army and choose their destination. You can choose to move an army both far and close, but each step will take several days to complete. And opposing armies can intercept your movement route to initiate a battle. Once a battle is initiated, the involved armies will take turns damaging each other until one side remains, in which case the defeated will automatically return to the closest friendly holding to recover, while the victor can continue traversing. I'd like to mention that the difference in the number of soldiers isn't necessarily the deciding factor in a battle, as you can gain bonuses and penalties depending on a lot of things. For instance, in this example, while we currently have a lower number of soldiers, by clicking on this battle and hovering our cursor here, we can see that we have a slight advantage due to several factors. I'd like to mention as well that separate allied armies can combine even in the middle of a fight. As an example, as we can see here, our opponents have a second army that's close, and after unpausing the game, we'll see that they chose to combine their armies to increase their chances of winning this battle. Aside from participating in battles, depending on the usual factors, some characters can raise their soldiers as raiders to raid and loot the holdings of opposing rulers for gold. Once a holding is successfully looted, they will suffer a penalty in income for a number of months. As mentioned earlier, one of the ways to acquire lands and titles is through wars. However, declaring a war has some requirements. To be able to declare a war, you'll need casus belli, or a justified reason to go to war against another ruler. There are different ways to gain casus belli against a ruler, but the most common are claims. Claims represent a character's legal right to obtain a title that isn't theirs yet. For example, our character has claims for all of these titles, which means we can easily go to war with the current holder of these titles to try and take it from them. There are three types of claims. Pressed claims, marked with this symbol, are legally strong and get passed down to heirs. Unpressed claims, marked with this symbol, are considered weak and don't get inherited by the heirs. However, these can be converted to pressed claims by going to war with the title holder. Implicit claims are given to all eligible children of the title holder. The children will lose the implicit claims if their parents lose the title. Aside from inheriting claims, there are other ways to gain a claim on titles, such as fabricating a claim using your court chaplain through this action here. Knowing who has claims to a title can be useful for you to find out possible rivals and characters who might fight you for a title. You can check this by clicking on a title and clicking on the Claimants button here in the upper right side of the panel. To declare a war, you can click on the notifications on the top of the screen where you'll be notified of which rulers you can go to war with. And by clicking one of these, we'll be presented with options of what we'd like to go to war for, or which lands and or titles we'd like to take from them. And as we can see, declaring a war will cost some resources. In this case, trying to take the entire Kingdom of Cyprus will cost 2,000 renown. In some cases, you can instead declare a holy war, where the cost will instead be in piety. Holy wars can be declared if the opposing ruler has a different faith. Once you declare a war, or a war has been declared on you, a banner will appear on the lower right side of the screen. This represents the progression of the war. A green positive number here will represent you having an advantage, and the red negative number will represent you losing. By clicking on this, you'll see a more detailed summary of how the score is computed, and how you'll be able to increase your war score. Above the war score bar, you'll find the different actions you can perform to advance your score. You can either hold objectives, which are usually the holdings that are in contention. You gain score from winning battles, occupying other holdings of the opposing ruler and their allies, and from taking relevant characters such as family and council members as prisoners. Here, you'll also find any allies of either rulers, and at the bottom of the screen, you'll find the 3 ways the war can end. By clicking on these options, you'll be able to see the rewards and or consequences of choosing the option. In this example, as we can see, our opponent will not accept the option to enforce our demands because we don't have leverage over them yet, which we will get once we progress our war score enough. As mentioned earlier, one of the ways to win a war is to take over the holdings of opposing rulers and their allies. Taking over a holding is pretty simple. First, you need to check the target holding's garrison. You'll find the holding's garrison here when clicking on a holding. If the attacking army has a lower number than the garrison, they won't be able to put the holding under siege. If your army has a high enough number, then it's just a matter of bringing them to the holding and waiting. However, like raids, Sieges can be interrupted by an opposing army by simply going to the same place, and holdings that have been taken over during wars can be retaken through the same process. When attacking opposing holdings, or sometimes through events, and even some actions, there's a chance for you to take some characters as prisoners. You can view your current prisoners on the Courtiers panel here, and clicking on the Prisoners tab. There are several things you can do to prisoners. You can ransom them for money, you can release them in exchange for a favor, or you can keep them imprisoned until they die. As mentioned earlier, alliances can be made through marriages by marrying yourself, your relatives, or children to important people from other realms. But you can also offer characters an alliance by simply right-clicking on a character and choosing the interaction option if it's available. Alliances can create a truce between you and the involved ruler, and you can call each other for help during a war. But take note that losing a war, even just as an ally, will incur penalties, and declining help from an ally will do the same. So be careful which rulers you'll choose to ally with. You can view your current alliances here in your character panel. Another huge part of the game is initiating schemes. Schemes are a way to influence and manipulate characters in the game state without going to war. You'll be able to find ongoing schemes here in the lower right side of the screen, and by opening the intrigue panel here. There are two types of schemes, personal and hostile schemes, and you can initiate one of each at the same time, and they can be cancelled at any time. Schemes can be initiated by right-clicking on a character and choosing one of the several interaction options available. Hostile schemes are schemes that could be considered treacherous or illegal, so are carried out in secret. And as you can imagine, failing hostile schemes can lead to terrible consequences for your character. Intrigue is the main skill used for hostile schemes. Some examples are attempting a murder, abduction, fabricating a hook, and so on. Your spymaster can play a vital role in these schemes as they can help increase the chances of success. Let's give an example of a hostile scheme and how they can be used. Let's say for instance I wanted to murder the Duke of Wessex. When initiating schemes, you will always be presented with the chances of how likely the scheme will succeed and the chances of people finding out about it. In this case, we have pretty bad odds. Each scheme comes with additional mechanisms that make them unique and different from each other. For instance, a murder scheme allows you to have agents that can help you progress or raise the chances of success of the scheme, which you can see here. Agents are other characters that are willing or could be convinced to help you with the scheme. There are several ways to garner agents for a scheme. Making sure people have a high opinion of you, having hooks on people, which we'll explain in a bit, manipulating people's opinion of your target so they become hated, and so on. Personal schemes are mostly used to progress your relationship with another character, whether it's to increase their opinion of you, befriend them, make them your lover, and so on. Unlike hostile schemes, different skills are used for different personal schemes. For instance, attempting to sway a person makes use of the character's diplomacy skill, while seducing a character will make use of your intrigue skill. And unlike hostile schemes, the consequences for failing personal schemes aren't as harsh. During schemes, events will pop up once in a while where you will be given options that could either advance or hinder a scheme's progress. For example, going back to the murder scheme earlier, fast forwarding the game, we received this diplomacy challenge event relating to the scheme. Like the other events explained earlier, here we're presented with options, and by hovering our cursor, we'll see the possible outcomes, chances, and the effects of each option. Hooks represent leverage you have with a character. They can be used to manipulate characters. You can check your current hooks by opening the intrigue panel and clicking on the Hooks and Secrets tab. There are different ways to acquire hooks. For instance, you have a hook on your children as soon as they are born. There are two types of hooks. Weak hooks are represented by a blue hook icon, and strong hooks are represented by an orange hook icon. Most offers you can make in the game has to be accepted by characters for the corresponding action to take effect. And for a character to accept an offer from you, there are prerequisites that you have to meet, such as having a high opinion of you or seeing some benefits for themselves. This is where hooks come into play. Having leverage in the form of hooks on other characters can help in persuading them to accept offers that might not be as beneficial for them. When sending an offer to a character, you'll find a box that you can tick to use a hook if you have one on the receiving character. Weak hooks can slightly increase the chance for them to accept, while strong hooks give them no other option but to accept. Different hooks also have different expirations. Some are permanent until used, some only last for several years, and some can be used over and over again. Secrets are the easiest way to gain a hook on characters. You can find out people's secrets through random events or by using one of your spymaster's actions here. Once you discover people's secrets, they don't do anything by themselves, but you'll be given the option to either use the secret to blackmail the character to possibly gain a hook if they care enough about hiding it, or you can expose the secret to possibly manipulate other people's opinion of that character. As mentioned earlier, one of the most crucial parts of the game is making sure you have a good heir in place, and there are several things to consider to make sure of this. The first thing we'll explain are succession laws. Your realm's succession laws will dictate who will inherit your titles when you die. In our current scenario, we have a Confederate partition law in place, which means our titles will be equally divided among our eligible children. Now, of course, ideally, we'd want all of our titles to be passed on to our heir, the character we will play as next. We can try to change our realm succession laws, but these are usually expensive and come with a lot of prerequisites. But to give an example, let's say we'd want to play as our youngest son after we die. In this case, we'd want to somehow change our succession law to ultimogeniture. Take note that you can click on these options to see the changes if these laws were passed. And you can hover your cursor over the Change Law button to see if any prerequisites aren't allowing you to do so. There are other ways to make sure your titles go to your preferred heir if you're unable to change your succession laws. You can try to limit your number of children to just one, although this could be risky as people can easily die in the game. You can disown or disinherit your children, which can be found as an interaction option when you right-click on a character, although, like everything in the game, this comes with its own prerequisites and consequences. You can marry off your children to other realms so that they are no longer part of your court, and you can even do some evil things which I will not specify but should be pretty obvious. Aside from making sure your titles go to the right people, you'd also want to make sure your next character has the right skills and traits for the playstyle that you want. The best way to do this is to make sure your child is focused on the right skill growing up. Once your child is born, you can click on this button on their character panel. Here, you can choose the education focus of your child. At some point, your child will get a childhood trait. These are randomly assigned and will provide your child additional points in 2 skills. In our current scenario, our child gained the bossy trait, which increases their martial and stewardship skills. By clicking their education focus once again, we'll see 2 skills highlighted by a green spotlight which signifies which skills this character will prefer to focus in, and the one in red signifies the skill they will struggle with, which is obviously inadvisable to choose. If you don't choose their education focus, it will randomly default to one of the 2 skills highlighted in green. The goal here is to be able to give your child a high education trait for a specific skill. Education traits are special traits that significantly increases a character's specific skill. Fast forwarding our current scenario, and choosing to focus our son's education on stewardship, we can see here that our son gained the Fortune Builder education trait, which increases his stewardship skill. Education traits have 4 levels represented by stars, and each increasing level adds more and more to the corresponding skill. There are many ways to influence the level of the education trait that your child will receive. One of the ways is to assign them a guardian early on. You can choose to assign a courtier as their guardian or even yourself. When assigning a guardian, there are 3 things to consider. One is their slow bright trait. This basically represents a character's intelligence. I won't go too much into detail here, but basically, it would be preferable to have a guardian with either the quick, intelligent, or genius trait. Other things to consider are the guardian's skill number on the focus you're choosing for the child, and their learning skill as well. Obviously, having higher numbers for these skills will provide better results. I'd like to mention that you can do much of the same process for other children in your court to prepare them for jobs in your realm, such as knighthood and consul positions. You can even attempt to educate children from other realms with your courtiers to bring them to your court. When choosing an heir, it's usually preferable to choose one that's young enough that when you die, you get to play the character for a long time. Normally, you wouldn't want your character to be already in their 60s just waiting to die. As mentioned earlier, not a lot of character progress and development gets carried over. For instance, you lose any acquired perks, prestige, level of fame, and people's opinion of your previous character. However, there are ways to mitigate the issue of your character living too long. For example, in some cases, you'll find the option to attempt suicide in the decisions panel. Take note that like most actions in the game, there is still a chance for this to fail, and there can be consequences. One of the downsides of having a lot of titles and vassals is that people from your court can create factions to try and take some of your titles away from you. You can find current factions by opening the faction panel here. Characters who start factions are usually your vassals and courtiers with claims. They can even be some of your own family members. This is one of the importance of keeping your courtier's opinion of you positive. When someone creates a faction, Other courtiers can join in as well, making their factions stronger. If unmanaged and if they get enough members, they can eventually make demands. There are many ways to weaken or eliminate a faction. The simplest being raising the members' opinion of you. And like any other characters, you can murder them, imprison them, send them away, and so on. If you're playing as a vassal, you can also create factions of your own. In the faction panel, you'll find a second tab that will allow you to join and create factions. Here, you can choose your reason as well for creating a faction, whether it's to lower the crown authority of your liege, so that you'll get a lot more control as a vassal, supporting another character's claim on a title, or to even dissolute your liege's realm to gain independence. But take note, like most things in the game, these will have their own requirements and restrictions. A huge part of the game that can drive your playstyle are culture and faith. The game comes with a lot of different cultures and a lot of different faiths, each with their own set of rules, restrictions, bonuses, and other idiosyncrasies. Let's explain faith first. You can open the faith panel by clicking here on the lower left side of the screen. Here, you'll find your faith's tenets, which are basically the rules and traditions of your current faith. You can hover your cursor over each one to see what effect they provide. Here, you'll also find the sins and virtues of your faith. Characters within a faith with traits that are considered sins will gain less piety and decreased opinion from characters of the same faith. On the other hand, characters within a faith with traits that are considered virtues will gain more piety over time and increased opinion from characters of the same faith. Here, you'll also find your faith's doctrines. These are the restrictions you'll be forced to follow as a member of this particular faith. And as usual, you can hover your cursor over each one to see a more detailed description of each. Faiths come with holy sites. You can view your faith's holy sites by clicking on the Holy Sites tab in the same panel. These are holdings relevant to your faith and will provide you with bonuses if you are in control of them. Another thing I'd like to point out here is fervor. This represents how strong the people's belief is for this faith. If a faith's fervor is low, the higher the chance that people might leave the faith or convert to other faiths. Fervor slowly goes up over time, and in order to speed this up or keep fervor at a higher number, the head of faith must have virtuous traits. However, take note that the rise of fervor slows down as the number of counties following the faith goes up. You can view the division of faiths in the map by clicking this button on the lower right side of the screen. If you don't like your current faith, there are ways to change this. One, as mentioned earlier, is converting to a different faith. You can convert to a different faith by clicking here, and you'll be presented with options of other faiths. But of course, this action comes with its own set of requirements and consequences. With the right circumstances, you can also create your own faith. This way, you can set your own tenets, sins, virtues, and doctrines. However, these actions will cost a lot of piety, one of the resources of the game. Culture, like faith, allows and restricts a lot of functions in the game. You can view your character's culture by clicking on this button on the lower left side of the screen. The two major components of a culture are its traditions and innovations. As always, you can hover your cursor over each one to see what they provide to your culture. If you're the culture head, this button becomes available, and you can establish new traditions. If you click the button, you'll be presented with tradition options along with their cost and the time it takes to establish them. To become the culture head, you need to control the most counties of the same culture. And to view the division of culture on the map, you can click this button on the lower right side of the screen. Innovations, on the other hand, unlock additional functions and automatically progress over time as long as you meet an innovation's prerequisite. As an example here, Caballero's innovation isn't progressing yet as the Anglo-Saxon culture isn't present in Iberia. Like Faith, you can also change to pre-existing cultures if you think that benefits you. In order to do this, you need to move your capital to a domain with a different culture. This of course requires you to take over holdings or titles of a different culture. To move your capital, simply choose the domain that you want as your new capital. If a domain is eligible, an icon of a crown with an arrow will appear next to the county's name, and clicking this icon will allow you to move your capital. Artifacts are special items that provide different bonuses if equipped to your character. You can find your inventory and available artifacts by clicking this button on the lower left side of the screen. And as usual, you can hover your cursor over available artifacts to see what they provide. To equip an artifact, simply click the slot with available artifacts, then click on the artifact with the bonuses that you want. You can gain artifacts through events, as gift from other characters, or when taking over opposing holdings. You can also commission an artifact through this button here if you have an assigned antiquarian, one of the court positions. To redemonstrate, You can assign an antiquarian through the Courtier panel here. Like court physicians, when choosing an antiquarian, it's important to check a character's aptitude. A character with a high learning skill is what makes a good antiquarian. So, if you have no good options like in our current case, it's better to first find and recruit a character with better skills. Aside from creating artifacts, your antiquarian is also in charge of maintaining and repairing artifacts as they can degrade and break over time. Artifacts can be gifted to increase a character's opinion of you, and they get passed down to your heir. Stress is a measure of your character's mental health. What increases and decreases a character's stress depends on their traits. Performing actions that go against your character's traits, for instance, will increase their stress. As an example, our current character has the arrogant trait, so granting a vassal independence will increase our stress, one of the many different actions that will do so. However, you don't have to worry too much about what actions will affect your stress, as the game will always warn you when presenting you with options. Every 100 points of stress increases your stress level, and there are 3 levels of stress. Each level comes with additional penalties, such as causing health issues to your character. This is another important use of traits, especially when shaping an heir. You would never want your character to have traits that will penalize you for your preferred playstyle. There are a lot of ways to decrease stress. One of the easiest ways is the call hunt decision that can be found in the decision panel. Sometimes you'll find actions that will mention increasing or decreasing dread. Dread represents how fearful your vassals are of you. You can find your dread rating by opening the Realm panel, the Vassals tab, and it will be down here. Dread can be helpful, as having a high number can force your vassals to accept a request even if they don't have a good opinion of you. This is especially helpful if you're playing as a cruel tyrant. At this point, I'd like to emphasize that a lot can be accomplished from the decision panel. It's good to always check what's available here, as more and more options become available as the game goes on, and most of these options can be really helpful. As I mentioned earlier, this isn't a fully comprehensive tutorial. Crusader Kings 3 is a dense game. There are a lot of aspects of the game that I either chose to omit from this tutorial or simply missed. To reiterate, some functions won't be accessible for a variety of reasons, usually restricted by a realm's fate, culture, or laws. If you find yourself with questions during the game, you can always hover your cursor over keywords which will bring up a short explanation, or you can use the game's encyclopedia, which can be found here on the bottom of the screen. Regardless, the information provided should be enough for you to be able to start a game knowing what you can do, what you'd like to do, and how you will go about doing those things. Thanks for watching.